The following is a program of the Santa Barbara County Education Office. To learn more, visit sbceo.org.
I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools, and I am so delighted to introduce our guest today, Alma Hernandez, who's the Executive Director of Corazón de Pueblo Cultural and Creative Arts Center in the Santa Maria Valley. Alma is also the District Representative for Supervisor Joan Hartman. Alma, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so honored to be here today.
I can't wait to have you share your story about your leadership and of the Cultural and Creative Arts Center, Corazón de Pueblo, and all the vision that you have behind it. But before we do, let's really start with you and where you were born and raised and brought up. Share us.
Well, I was born in the late 60s. To two immigrant parents. I'm second generation Mexican-American family. My parents met and dated in high school at Roosevelt High in East LA. About that time was the time of the Vietnam War. My dad was about to be drafted into Vietnam, and he decided that the best way, if he was going to be going to war, that he wanted to sign up, enlist himself so that he can choose the vocation that he wanted to work in. So he began working in telecommunications, and he was doing some training in Arizona, Fort Huachuca, and that's where I was born, in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, during that time. After my dad was released, finished his term, we moved back to the Los Angeles area, but he wanted us to grow up in an area that wasn't as violent or risky as the East LA area. So we moved into the suburbs, an area called the San Gabriel Valley, which is where I grew up.
Thank you for sharing that. And do you have siblings?
Yes, I have two brothers and a sister. And unfortunately, during that time, it was a very challenging, experience growing up. It was after the Vietnam War. There was a lot of unrest in the communities. There was a lot of racism and a lot of things that, our family was dealt with. Including, poverty and everything, trying to make it in a new country. So there was, that all came into our families. My parents got divorced when I was very young. There was alcoholism in the home and a lot of violence. So it was a very, very challenging time. My brothers and sisters and I, because of that, we became very close. I became sort of the mother of the family. But we coped mostly with like a sense of humor. We got along really well, and we were very supportive of each other. We loved each other very much, and we just laughed about everything, and so unfortunately that gave me a very dark sense of humor. but it was our way of getting along.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you've shared that in terms of the facts that you really had to come through something together as a family, and you talk about how you coped as a family as well and stuck together. And I know that must bring forward in other ways and other aspirations that you've already seen through in our community here. I'm so interested in education, so I've got to ask about your education.
Yeah.
Where did you go to school? Elementary, junior high, high school, and college?
I went to school in the city of Rosemead, elementary school called Jansen Elementary, Rosemead High School, and then I went to a community college, Pasadena City College, which was a really great experience. The biggest challenge for me was that with all that turmoil in the household, I developed a learning disability. And so I struggled a lot. I loved learning. Learning has always been one of my greatest passions, but it never was reflective in my grades. By the time I hit high school, during that time it wasn't diagnosed. When you had a learning disability, I tried to stay, out of trouble. And if you're not getting in trouble, you're not getting diagnosed. You fall through the cracks, and that's what happened to me. I fell through the cracks. I received my test scores, where you are evaluated as to what's the best career for you, and my result came out taxi driver. So it was very discouraging. It was a very discouraging time, but I was still set on that I really wanted to make a difference. You know, I took lots of notes of the things that I liked and the things that I didn't like, and I made it my life's goal to make a difference, you know, to change those things for kids that struggled like myself.
Right.
And so I decided that regardless of my grades, that I was going to go to school, that I was going to be educated, and because I wasn't going to be able to do anything unless I, you know, pursued that goal.
So determined, with such grit and perseverance. I mean, one of the things already, and we haven't even gotten into so many questions yet, but one of the things already as a theme is that you've had some adversity, some challenges, and you've overcome them, and you've done this with a lot of, sounds like support, but also an inner intention of making it and doing what you need to do to make that happen. In terms of school, how did you find yourself, you use the word cope, so I'll do that again, coping or making it? What kind of tools did you use?
Well, it was tough. You know, I failed a lot of classes, unfortunately, not just in my undergraduate. In my undergraduate and in high school, I just kept saying to myself, you know, I'm not going to go home until I get that degree. And so I kept doing it. I kept going. I kept, you know, I ended up coming to Cal Poly, which was, again, it was not an easy decision. You know, once I arrived here, I still felt that sense of being invisible. I didn't feel the sense of acceptance. The culture was so different. And again, I just kept taking notes. This is what I don't like about our community, and these are the things that we need to change. So I guess that's the main thing, is that I just used all those adversities as my inspiration. And so, you know, I kept saying, I don't want this to happen to anybody else, and I want to make a difference. I think that was my biggest thing. So I was really fortunate that I think that was one of my gifts, that I had a lot of hope and a lot of passion, and you know, just was determined to use that.
Alma, you've said so much in your response, and one of the things that you said was about making visible the invisible. And I think that's something that you, in knowing your career path and what you're doing today, that is what you're doing, is you're really making visible to the community the beautiful culture of people and the arts and the humanity behind people who really you want to show are as visible and important in the community. So I can't wait to dive right into that. You said Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. What was your major? And at the time, what were your career aspirations?
I majored in human development and early childhood education and Spanish. And so I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew it was going to be in education. I knew, you know, I wanted to work in the education field. But when I did my internships in teaching, I really felt like, though that I was passionate about education, I really wanted to focus on those kids that were falling through the cracks. So I decided to move more into social work. And so after I graduated, I began working in Guadalupe at the, you know, what is known now as a Little House by the Park, as a resource center for families with kids who are struggling in school.
Let's talk about the Little House on the Park. It's now known as that, as you said. At the time, was it known with a different title, or what?
Yeah, back then it was known as the Healthy Start. We were established as with the Healthy Start grants back in the 90s, and so it was opened up as a resource center for the Guadalupean School District.
I see. And so when it turned into and evolved into the Little House by the Park, your role evolved too. You started in one role and ended in another there. Can you say about that?
I started off as a social worker, you know, a case manager, working with the families. I did that for 2 years. And after the 2 years ended, that's when the funding ended. So everybody left. The director left, and I was the only one left.
That's a difficulty with the nonprofit world or in some community funded or grant funded.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I loved what I did, and I was determined to keep it going. And I applied for the job of the executive director, and and I got it. I ended up getting it. I'd never done grant writing or anything, and I think that's one of my other biggest things is I have a tendency to jump into things that I've never done before because I think that they're important and they need to be done. So I decided to do that and learn what it was like, what it was going to take, and I think ultimately I think the funny story about the thing is that I didn't get the job as executive director. I wasn't the first choice. The parents who I worked with, in case management, they actually petitioned to the superintendent of the school and said, we don't know why you didn't choose Alma, but we know her and we know that she will support us and that she will do what's right. She cares about the community. And that's what ended up getting me the job, is that
Wow.
they came and they brought a petition to the superintendent and told him that I was a person that was going to represent them.
How did that make you feel?
Oh, it was magical. It's such a beautiful experience to be acknowledged, after so many difficulties and hardships. It was nice to be able to feel like something that you gave someone mattered,
Right.
So in school, when I studied and I worked hard, it didn't seem like it ever mattered. And in my home environment, it was such a challenge. Growing up in an alcoholic home, I lost my mom by the time I was 22, and you felt like no matter what you did, it just didn't matter. So it was just such a beautiful feeling to be able to experience, knowing that what you did made a difference to someone.
Wow, that's very, very impactful. And as you were there, obviously the individuals that you served, the families, they saw you as a leader. They really wanted to advocate for you, and you advocated for them. And so that leadership aspect of your work really grew. And I understand that you participated in Leading from Within.
I did.
And so share a little bit about that network, and then what are some of the nuggets that you learned from being in that network?
Well, Leading from Within was the very first program that I ever had the opportunity to be a part of, that I really felt was quality and had some very experienced and substantial leaders, and honest. It had such an honest element to it about what it means to be a leader. How most leaders feel like they're not worthy, how most leaders feel like imposters, have imposter syndrome. And then, just really looking at those issues, as community leaders, public officials, you always see like, oh, what a great leader. They dress so well and they're just so poised and they speak well, but you don't know what's behind all that, And I always felt, everything that was behind all that, but I never knew, like that other people felt the same way. So it was really nice to be able to reach that level of honesty and also be able to get the resources to, to make the work that you're doing successful.
So really honing in with the genuine characteristics of leadership versus what sometimes you sense about people, which is more external. Oh, that person must be a great leader because of something you see or assume to see externally, but really went into the inside and behind the curtain, so to speak.
Yeah, and the other thing I really I loved about the program was that this was learning about the leadership style. It really complemented what I felt, what I believed in regards to not being a leader, not having a leadership style where you're in control of everything, but really learning to empower and give tools to your team. To make leaders out of the people around you. To make space for other people to be able to express themselves, to be able to use their talents, to do their best job. And I always felt that way. I felt, that's the kind of environment that I wanted to create, that I created in the little house by the park, in my community that I was working in. And so it was nice to be able to hear that and I guess give voice to those concepts that I believed in.
Very, very powerful. So Alma, what led you to create, lead, to envision Corazón del Pueblo? Because that is something that it really comes from your passion, your vision, your heart.
Yeah.
Yes, so share with us.
As I mentioned, a couple of things, happened, and I always try to use whatever opportunity I have to, to promote, just the changes that I want to see in the community. When I was doing my master's program, that's when I got involved in the dual immersion program, and we were able to bring that to the Santa Maria schools and finally establish the first classroom. When I did the Leading from Within program, we had to do a capstone project, and so I got really inspired with some of the voices that were speaking in the community during that time. Unfortunately, that was right after a lot of the violence was happening in Santa Maria. There was a lot of youth violence, and I think a lot of children, a lot of teenagers, have been shot and had died, and students were getting together and they were communing, they were having workshops to really delve into what was causing the violence, how can we stop it, and what they wanted to see different in the community. And one of their number one things that they shared was that they felt that they needed a space where their heritage was validated, their voices were validated, and also that kids that did not necessarily fit into the traditional school system, maybe that they weren't academics, maybe they weren't athletic, that they had a place where they had a voice and an ability to express their talents. So upon hearing that, having the opportunity to do a capstone project, having the resources there, everything just clicked, and I said, this is the time. This is the time to do this. And so I decided to work with those youth and to work with the community members who also had that same vision. And I was very lucky that, it just seemed like everything fell into place. I met with some great community leaders, Margarita Olimpio, Samuel Duarte, Elsa Velasco, and many others who, shared the same passion. And I guess with everything going on, and with somebody who was willing to take the lead, we decided to establish Corazón del Pueblo.
And that someone being you.
Yeah.
And you're the executive director, and I understand that it's a voluntary position for you. I mean, this is something that is, as you have said to me, I'll use your words, a passion project.
Passion project,
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a passion project. To me, what that means is that I'm a very passionate person. I have I'm purposeful in what I want to be able to accomplish and the changes that I want to make, the difference that I want to make in the community, and feel that sometimes I don't think everything through as to what things are going to take, but I know that they need to be done. So. When I say passion project, it means I have delved headfirst into making this happen in an unstoppable way, and regardless, I guess of the work and the intensity that it's going to take to make it come to fruition.
That's fantastic. So, for somebody who does not know or hasn't visited Corazón del Pueblo, can you describe what it is? Mm-hmm. What is Corazón del Pueblo?
Corazón del Pueblo is a space for Latino community to have a voice. It's a space of expression, it's a space of understanding, and it's a space of community. So we opened up Corazón del Pueblo on March 31st on Cesar Chavez Day, and we decided to collaborate together with the Open Streets Project. And our first exhibit was a photo exhibit of when Cesar Chavez came to Santa Maria. It was one of the most beautiful, magical experiences that I feel like everybody there experienced and felt. Open Streets brought in about 20,000 people. I would say at least half of those came into Corazón del Pueblo that day. And it was just so beautiful to see people in tears who saw their family members in this historical place, in this historical exhibit, who had never seen themselves, who had never seen their family, who had never seen the representation in a positive way. When Latinos hit the news, it's rarely for something positive. You see a lot of, there's drugs, there's gang violence, there's immigrants, there's rapists, or, what have you. But to be able to be seen in a positive light, these were our family members who were working together, who were fighting for farm worker justice, together with Cesar Chavez. We were making a difference. Just the impact that it had on our community, was magical. I don't know any other way to describe it except that.
Wow. I envision it as you're saying it, and I saw that there were pictures and photos of Cesar Chavez here in Santa Maria with family members right here from the Santa Maria Valley, and I understand that people who were there were pointing at their uncle or their aunt
Yes.
or their grandfather and said, I didn't know that he was there. And so people were, as you said, literally identifying themselves in these pictures, or their family and their culture and their heritage. Sounds really beautiful.
It meant so much to them. It meant so much to everyone, all of us. And it was beautiful to be a part of.
What other exhibits are either coming or have visited your center?
In June we had Juan Felipe Herrera, the United States Poet Laureate, attend our center. He provided a workshop where he worked with the community member students, up to seniors. It's we have an age range of 0 to 100, and so he worked with them on how to build expression, how to express ourselves, how to create, how to write, like out of our gut, like our, in our heart. And so it was a beautiful experience to be a part of that too. And also we had in a collaboration with Cause, where we had an immigrant rights-focused play. We had a collaboration with Hope Esperanza on Pride Day, where we had Leo Cortez from PCPA work together to establish a Pride-focused play. And right now we have a hip-hop exhibit collaboration with Cal Poly, where we went on opening day. We had hip-hop artists and a disc jockey and live mural paintings and just it was a very lively experience, and just filled with music and the poetry of hip-hop.
And if people who are watching today wanted to learn more or get involved or participate, enjoy the center, how would they get more information?
Well, right now we are at 124 West Main Street. They can come by. We unfortunately, because we are our all volunteer staff, we're not open every single day. But if you check us out on Facebook, you can know when we are open, when we're having exhibits, and just stop by.
Great. Corazon del Pueblo on Facebook.
Yes, Corazón del Pueblo on Facebook.
Thank you. And so let's turn a corner and talk about your family, your actual personal family. I know that you have children in school. Can you say a little bit about your family?
Yes, of course. I have two wonderful kids and 2 step boys too. My kids, Vicente and Catalina, they're both students at Pioneer High School. One's a senior and one's a freshman. And to me, they're my biggest inspiration. I mentioned earlier that, one of my gifts I feel like has been hope, but really they took it tenfold. Children just are, they just have a way of just renewing your hope in life and wanting to make a better community for them. I love the way they think. With my experiences, it's very easy to be cynical or just have a less forgiving look at society and where we are today, but they're not like that. Their ideas are fresh, they're objective. They just inspire me to, me myself want to be a better person, and also create a better community. And they're doing really well. They're, my son's in football, and my daughter, she's a drummer in the band. And so I just feel like they bring a lot of light to wherever they are, and I'm very lucky to be their mom.
Well, your face lights up when you talk about them, so I can tell, and we all can tell how much beauty and light there is with your family and your children.
Thank you.
And you being such an advocate and persistent and driven, do you see that in your children as well? And do they have passion projects yet?
Well, my daughter, she's more the one that loves to get involved in the community. So, I love seeing that about her. And my son, he gets very committed to whatever he's doing. He puts his best into it. He's very loyal, so I do see that quality in him. Both of them. Unfortunately, what I'm still learning is self-care, learning to recognize your own voice and, your own needs. And so that's one of the things that I want to see them improve as well. But I imagine that I have to be that example for them.
Earlier we talked about leadership, and I'd like to talk about it again. And in one of the things, I know we probably have this, very likely have this in common, in that we really believe that mentors or others have really helped and inspired us. Might not just be one person, might be a variety of people. But as you reflect on your leadership, were there any mentors that you'd like to mention in terms of who they are and what they have provided for you in terms of lessons learned?
Yeah. Like you said, some of us have a lot of mentors, and I feel like that's kind of how, my experiences have been, though I missed out on the opportunity of having my mom, and so I was always sort of like disappointed by that. But I can, definitely say that there's qualities about my mom that, really inspired me. She was a very loving person. And I feel like, she filled me up with a lot of unconditional love that I experience for, just community in general. I see the beauty, in people, and I see, what everybody has to bring to the table. My dad, he's a very passionate and social justice advocate, and so that, was very inspiring, as a mentor in that regards. My best friend, Samuel Duarte, who's currently the director at Little House by the Park, he's the one that taught me, because I was working more in the social service field, but understanding, how to work with people in a way that gives them dignity. It doesn't take away their dignity or their choice, but really shows them how to fight for themselves, for their rights, to make their opinions matter and their voice matter, to change the system so that it works for everybody, as opposed to, just working in the same old way and trying to feed the poor and trying to, provide clothing and so forth, but really not just looking at that, but looking at how we need to make changes so that everybody has an opportunity to take care of themselves. I think that's ultimately what we all want.
I think you're right, we do. And we talked about those before you or those by your side that have taught you lessons in leadership. What about the future generation, Alma? When you think about the children coming forward, not just your own, but all of the youth, what would you say are some of the really important skills that our youth today really need to have as they graduate from high school, as they go on to careers? What are some of those leadership skills, or any skills that they need?
I'm really happy to see that there's so many leadership programs out there now. There wasn't so many when I was younger, but it's nice to see that, there's like the Future Leaders of America. There's programs through the Fund for Santa Barbara. There's, just a lot of youth-inspired leadership types of program. My daughter's involved in the Keystone Club with the Boys and Girls Club, and so I love that they're getting those opportunities to develop speaking skills. That's really important, and also, but I think now it's also important to remember to, as children, youth are growing up with more confidence and more understanding of their space, that it's important to also remember to always make space for others. So I think that's really important. And then to not shy away from, I guess, hard work. Because I think that's a big factor in being able to achieve, what we believe in, is that we don't give up. We don't lose hope, and we don't give up. That's something that I remember talking to my daughter about, when she was going through a really tough time a few years ago, is that, we're survivors. We are not giving up, and we are, going to push no matter what. We can't always control, what happens in our community, our society, but we're not going to stop trying to make those changes. And so I think that's my biggest lesson that I want to share with the youth.
Alma, thank you so much for being my guest today and for sharing about your background and your history and the lessons learned and your leadership, and truly about your passion and persistence, your grit, and making visible what sometimes and traditionally has been invisible. I think it's so important, in your lessons of hope and perseverance are really something that'll stay with me for a very long time. Alma, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me this time to share with you and get to know this project as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools, and thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Local Leaders.